The worst ones are, and maybe you can tell me about this. You quote something and you say, hey, this is the job. We're going to be on site 3 days. And, you provide a quote. And as you have to prepare for the worst. You put some contingencies in there, but, you're hoping that, you've caught everything. So then you're on site for 2 days because the job just goes stellar and it just goes right through.
That happens?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, here and there. But you just kick the job and everything goes great. And the customer's like, well, you said you were going to be on site 3 days and you're only on site 2 days. Like, I want some money back. And it's like, well, wait, if we were on site 4 days, would you be paying us extra? No. But, so when the job goes good, that we're screwing them over as a contractor. But when it goes bad, they're like, oh, figure it out. Sucks to suck. And yeah, I mean,
Well, you were talking about, we were selling boilers to an international control company. And so they sent me out a purchase order for 2 boilers. And I looked at the terms and it said net 120 days. I said, that's not going to work. He said, well, that's our terms. I said, well, then you're not getting my boilers. Go find someone else. And, I had to go through all kinds of aggravation, but they ended up saying, oh, we have a special terms for small companies that's net 30. I'm like, okay, I can live with that. You're right. These big companies are just trying to dictate, and they don't care if you're going to go out of business. They figure there's someone else, 10 other companies waiting in line for you to, to take your place. And granted, we do a terrible job of valuing ourselves, and showing what the value is and as a contractor.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know in the general construction, net 120 is popular. I've only experienced and heard of net 90, but and I'm not a corporate finance person. I'm a terrible business owner because, there is a method to madness for corporate finance, and I call it fancy accounting. And basically, you get a bunch of accountants together that, they say, we're going to hoard our cash and we're going to slow pay all our vendors. And, we want returns. We're basically getting financing from the people that we are buying from.
Right.
And like you said, they don't care if you go out of business. They want what they want. And like I'm a small business, and I've luckily not had anybody not pay, but I don't have, if somebody, if I have very few things that I'll buy that are like net 30, but I'll send a check after a week or whatever, because I understand cash flow and how hard it is, and having to wait 30 days after services are rendered and you have payroll go out the door, at the end of the week. Like, it's a hard thing to manage. I mean, I guess, do you have a bunch of problems or any problems with customers not paying or?
Oh, I did. I've had my share over the years. I've been doing this 40 years, and now I kind of get to the point. I guess I'm toward the end of my career, and I'll just tell them, look, I need 50% up front, and a lot of them will balk at that, and I'll say, go find someone else, and then they find people, especially on boilers. Boilers are a unique skill because a lot of the newer technicians don't understand them at all. So, we'll tell the people and say, look, I need this money up front. And, at least you're not losing everything. But, I've had customers that have gone out of business on me. I had a control company. We did some work, or not a control company, it's a chemical manufacturer, and they went out of business, went bankrupt, and I got stuck on the hook for 2 boilers. Well, the vendor didn't want to hear that my customer went out of business. They wanted their money, which I ended up having to pay, and so it came out of my pocket versus. And then the guy, when they come out of bankruptcy, asked me if I wanted to do work with them again. I'm like, no, you got me once. I'm sorry,
Yeah, a lot of people they hear bankruptcy and they think doors close there and the company has no money. Corporate bankruptcy, and there's different chapters. I'm not an
Right,
expert, but corporate bankruptcy, a lot of times they say, "Hey, our business is not viable how it currently sits. We want to restructure," and basically the debt gets, you know, pennies on the dollar to everybody that they owe. They restructure.
right,
They come out, you know, a different corporate entity or whatever. They sell. They do a bunch of fancy accounting, and then they pop back up, and it's like, wait, like your old company, they owed me money, and now you want me to do more business with you, and maybe you have a new logo, and this.
that's so true.
I don't understand. Like, I'm like, once again, I'm the farthest thing from a good business owner as far as like the what corporations are doing. And I mean, it's, small business is the backbone of America. Like, I guess, so how many employees do you have?
Right now we have 3. We at one time we were up to about 9, I think it was the biggest. And I got so frustrated with it, Eric, that all I was a babysitter. You're dealing with people that I had one guy, we had set up the shutdown and we were going to send a technician out there, and he was supposed to be there at 8 o'clock, right? And I got a call at 9:30. Where's your guy? And so I called him, and he goes, "Oh, I had a toothache today. I'm not coming in." I'm like, "Well, did you think about calling me?" And you lose credibility. But I just, I like right now I do more consulting, training, expert witness, and I'm enjoying that more. I don't have to deal with some of these technicians that are out there that are going to leave for 50 cents an hour more.
Yes, that is a problem, especially, I mean, it's, so 3, 4 people in your company, that's a small business. You can still, generate a decent amount of revenue, but that it contracting is a volume game.
Right,
And when you have even 20 people, when you have 20 people, one person has so much power, and it's not like you're, a mechanical contractor on a project with 30 people installing ductwork and one person doesn't show up, and then you just move the teams around a little bit. It's, you call your customer and say, "Hey, our service guy is going to be there tomorrow morning to
right.
fix your problem that you've been waiting a week, for service or whatever." And then, yeah, then they don't show up, and the customer thinks like, like, "Oh, like you said you were going to be," and then, and that's the problem of business, is people are human and stuff does come up, whether it's actual stuff or it's just, the person's a bad employee. And like you said, it can end up being babysitting. And, it's a tough spot when a lot of companies, they just need, sounds kind of heartless to say, they just need warm bodies in the door. And, it's like, they sell, "Hey, we're going to change the filters on your air handlers, or whatever, for a contract." And, that just, it doesn't take a ton of high knowledge, but it just takes somebody to do it. And, you can't always have the highest standards for people and then also try to train them to be a service technician. Like, there's just not enough people to go around. So what are you working on today? And are you So big fan of your books.
Thank you.
You have a lot of books. I think I have all of them, but the brewery one. And I guess one. Let's start with the books, but I want to hear about the brewery. But are you writing anything new or?
No, right now I'm just focusing on my YouTube channel. I'm having fun with it. And what I found, Eric, was it's a
What is
whole different. Go
what
ahead.
is the name of that channel?
It's Boiler Room Detective. Um, what I found was it opened up my book sales to a whole different avenue, and it really helped me get some nice book sales out of it. So I'm having fun with it. It's enjoyable, and this friend of mine had this saying, don't die with the song stuck inside you, and it was a and that's I'm trying to leave behind what I have because there's not a lot of people that know about boilers, and it's a forgotten art. I mean, I love boilers, and ever since I started as an apprentice, um, and they're people just don't understand how it's a great way of heating a building or providing process steam, and a lot of people, think, oh, boilers are dangerous, and it frustrates me. We're starting to see, like, I was going to do a boiler seminar in the Baltimore area, and it's always been a pretty good area for steam seminars. And I got onto the website for the labor and industry there, and I looked at all the boilers they have in the Baltimore area, and it's, oh my goodness! My last one was probably 3 years ago. There's less than half of what was there before, and people were trying to say, well, we're going to use um, ductless mini splits or VRFs for space heating instead of boilers, and I think that they're being misled by the industry because the boilers will last twice as long as a ductless mini split or a VRF system.
Yeah, heat pumps are a big thing, and now they're getting heat pumps that can heat in negative temperatures.
Right.
They're a lot high electrical costs, especially. It may work for a residential, house, a boiler, to somebody who just wants to come in, turn on the thermostat, and walk away. A hydronic boiler could do that. It still's got a little bit more maintenance, but if you have a steam system, I mean, I don't know anybody that's putting in a steam boiler in a new house, but hydronic heat, everybody that I've met that has hydronic heat in their house, they say it is the most comfortable thing that they've ever had. The heat is so even, and that they'll never buy another house without hot
Right.
water heat. And I mean, you almost have to experience it, and a lot of people take it HVAC for granted. I went to college for HVAC, and they always said that the best HVAC systems are the ones when you walk into a building that you don't think, hey, it's cold or warm in here. If you never think about the temperature, you are comfortable. And there's so much that goes into it, humidity and, your leaving temperature of the air ducts and all that stuff. But you are in the Pittsburgh area. Is
Right.
that correct?
Yes.
Does downtown Pittsburgh have a central steam plant, kind of like New York at all?
They do. It's small in comparison to what New York has. It's and it goes to several of the large uh, buildings, the high rises in Pittsburgh.
Do you ever get into those old high rises or see
I
any?
do. I love them. I love the stories they tell. There was one that was it was the Gulf Oil Tower or Gulf Tower, and back in the day, I used to work for a control company, and we were there, and the old maintenance guy told us the story about it. Like, they didn't have air conditioning back then, Eric, and They relied on the chimney effect inside the building, and they would have little dampers that would open up and allow air to come into the offices and things like that. But just, some of the older buildings, like I use as a for instance, people will say, well, what steam pressure should I use on a steam boiler for space heating? And I'll say 2 psi, and you'll hear these guys balk at it. Oh, no, 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 it's got to be 5 to 7. And I'll tell them the story about the Empire State Building in New York City heats their building on 2 to 3 pounds of steam pressure, and they won a Leeds Gold Award for efficiency. Now they're since going to take it out, but steam is very efficient. It'll last 4 decades, inside if it's properly maintained in a building. But I kind of went off topic there. Sorry.
No, there is no topics on this podcast. The topic is good conversation and boilers. So, with your books, I want to get back because I'm curious. Do you have any plans for any new books or topics?
I think I'm kind of boilered out. I don't really see too much more that I could write about. But what I may do is go over some of my older books, and update them to some of the new standards. Maybe some of the new codes, maybe some of the new, increase some of the formulas that are in the back. That's what most of the people want to see is the formulas. So if you're a service technician out on a job, you can pull up, look at the back of my book and say, hey, what size should this pump be? What size should this boiler feed tank be? Because you're out there on your own, and it's as you know, the boiler rooms can be a lonely place. And especially when the client's looking over your shoulder saying, hey, when am I going to have heat on? But what I love about our industry is just when you think you got it figured out, right? Like you think, oh, I've written 14 books. I know everything about this. It'll smack you upside the head like Gibbs did in NCIS and say, hey, dummy, I'll bet you'd never thought about this. And it keeps you honest. And I love that about our industry is, you see something you've never seen before.
Yeah, that's something I experienced. And I only did service for 7 years, but I only did commercial boiler service, commercial industrial boiler service and burners and all that. And so that's pretty niche. And then I hear about like HVAC contractors or HVAC guys. They're trying to learn all the equipment, rooftops, chillers, boilers, everything. And, they're within the first 10 years of their career and they're like, I feel like I know nothing. And they're like, they're useless and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I only work on boilers and I feel useless half the time. And, you walk into a boiler room and you're like, man, I thought I knew it. And then I'm like, this is something totally different. I remember, I got, essentially contracted out to babysit 2 rentals at a chemical plant in West Virginia for a week. And I'd probably been working 3 years at this point, and I thought I knew something about boilers. And let me tell you, so one, it was like a perfect storm scenario of I was there with another guy. We were doing 12 and a half hour shifts. They needed 24-hour coverage. So, but we got there and they had 2 rental boilers, like a 800 horsepower and 1,000 horsepower boiler, high pressure steam. And there were 2 separate rental companies. They couldn't get a boiler from the same rental company. And one company sent out a representative and the other company did not. They just said, oh, well, you guys can just start it up. And they had this old Siemens controller. I forget what it was. But I would say, it's a parallel positioning system, but it's not. It's whatever the Siemens controller. It had red analog display on it and everything. And I'm like, I have never even seen this thing before. And it's outdated at this point. And luckily, like the national sales manager or something picks up the phone at like 11 p.m. And I'm like, hey, dude, like, I'm supposed to start up this trailer. I have no idea what's going on. And the trailer was from California, and it had uh, a mesh burner on a 800 horsepower fire tube. And I had never even seen a mesh burner on a fire tube. I'm, from Ohio. I'm like, what's a mesh burner on a 800 horsepower fire tube? And I'm like, I can't get this thing to light. We've tried 20 times. We can't even get it to light. And we ended up opening up the gas valve, the butterfly valve, like 20 degrees before it would even light.
Wow.
And we were making all these kinds of changes. And since it was only a 5-day rental, the companies decided that, oh, well, chemical is not worth it. Well, the problem is the chemical plant from their steam house or whatever, it was they had turbines and everything, but they're sending us RO water, and all these trailers decided that TDS probes were the greatest thing to control level. So just randomly all the time, the boiler's going down on low water, and the DA tanks are going down on low water, even though that they're not on low water, because these TDS probes can't determine what the level of the water is because the water is so pure. I learned more in that 5 days about how to keep boiler operations going and staying going in a trailer. But 1,000 horsepower fire tube, like, you can't even hear yourself think when you are in a rental like that. And it's just, and the steam place will be calling you on the radio. You'll come out of the rental and they'll be like, hey, we were calling you for the last hour. You're like, oh man, I was working on the boiler, like trying to get it running. And yeah, it's fire and brimstone. But
Right.
yeah, just, I mean, and that's the thing with the boiler industry. And I see on your website, pneumatics, like old churches, old schools, old buildings have pneumatics. And, what is your experience with pneumatic systems? And, how do you teach people, or how do you learn them?
I worked for Johnson Controls when I was an apprentice doing pneumatic control service, and it was funny. I went from in the field doing installation to Johnson Controls, and those steam fitters would make fun of me. I'd be like, "Oh, I'm putting a 1/4-inch copper tubing there," and they're laughing at me. And one of the things that I said to them, I said, "Well, I can get your stuff to work. I'll bet you can't." And they were right, but I love the pneumatic controls. Some of those guys were crazy. It was a way different time back then, Eric. I worked with the journeymen, and they would, the customer would come up and say, "How does this thing work?" And they would drop the F-bomb on them. "Get away from me. We're not telling you how this works." I'm like, oh my gosh, how do you get away with it? And it was this hidden secret. They would flip off the owners. And I remember working with a guy that was my cousin, my second cousin. And we went into this classroom, and when you took the bleed port off the pneumatic control, you would hear it whistling, hissing. And he started coughing and gagging, and he's going, "Oh my God, the gas, the gas." We got thrown out of the school because he thought it was funny. And my boss was really upset, but I was a first year apprentice and I was like terrified, but they just sent me to the next one. But it was just a different era back then. I mean, the pneumatics, they worked forever. You'd see them 50-year-old buildings that had pneumatic controls that worked. And the industry was just so different back then because you had your control technicians, you had your boiler technicians, you had your air conditioning, and your electricians. And everybody was pointing fingers at everyone else. And one of the things that frustrated me was I would go out there and I would, check the pneumatics and it wasn't there. And I would tell the owner, "Look, I'm sorry, your pneumatics are working fine. I don't know why you don't have heat." And so I wanted something where I understood how the whole system worked. And so I started to go into classes to read electrical drawings, to understand boilers, to understand air conditioners. So I could at least get them to some heat or, in the middle of the night or something like that. So, but yeah, it was a different time back then. And we would put in, and you probably saw a lot of these in your area, these Columbus warm air furnaces. And it's like a giant furnace, and they would have it in a room that's the size of a boiler room. They had these burners inside there, and they would have a huge fan that you would have to start. And the idea was they used to put them in schools everywhere.
When, you keep saying it was a different time back then, how'd you get into the boiler industry or into HVAC, and what year was that? And then I guess how long, like, what was your career progression until you started or founded Fire and Ice Heating and Cooling?
Well, I was a steam fitter, and then I was on my way home from a building around 1979 from a service call, and I got in a really bad wreck.
Was that $499?
$449.
$449?
Exactly.
Yeah, they have their I have one of their stickers, their steam fitter stickers.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
It was, I was on my way back, and I was in a really bad auto wreck, and I had really bad inner ear problems and back problems and neck problems. I couldn't really do the work anymore. So I'm like, I was just newly married. I'm like, what am I going to do? And so a friend of mine owned a company, QDOT here in Pittsburgh. He was a mechanical contractor and service division. Dan Whale, he was an amazing guy, smart. And he offered me a job doing sales because his salesperson left. And so I got involved with sales and went to Dale Carnegie class and Sandler sales techniques. And we ended up growing the business. I was there about 2.5 years. And then I got a job with Carrier, and I was with them for about 2.5 years. And I found this opportunity where this company was for sale. And so I talked with the owner, and I purchased the company. And how I got involved with boilers was that, like, the competition, it was ruthless back then. I mean, it probably still is now, but they would say, oh, this guy doesn't know anything about boilers, and you trust him with your boilers. And so I did everything I could to learn about boilers. I found Dan Holohan's books, and I started reading about them, and started, I remember one of my sales classes was, the instructor was saying, if you want to be good at anything, you got to read 15 to 30 minutes a day about your industry. So I started to do that, and I became fascinated with boilers. Just like every boiler, as you can attribute this, every boiler is different. They all have their own personality. You have an air conditioner, and you take it from one building to another, and it's going to work the same way, but a boiler doesn't. A boiler doesn't do that. So I was just fascinated with how, and you could have 3 boilers down in a boiler room, and they're all going to be different based on the draft or the air. They all have their own personalities. And that's what really intrigued me by it. And so because of my competition telling me that I didn't know anything about boilers, I started to work on it. And then I started to do seminars on boiler safety. And the reason I did that was it was a friend of mine was a facilities director at a school north of Pittsburgh. And he was a custodian, and he became a facilities person, and his boiler got sooted. And he ended up trying to clean it himself. He thought he'd save some money. And as you know, that soot got everywhere. It went everywhere on him. And as he was cleaning it, uh, he hit it with a wire brush and it ignited. And he got third-degree burns up his arms, second degree on his face. And I thought, man, someone should do this. So I started doing these seminars. And as I was doing one for a friend of mine that we did a lot of work for, I was training his technicians on it. He said, this should be in a book. And I said, oh, okay, I'll put this together. And that was my first book. And it took me over 2 years to put it together. And I was cursing him up and down because I thought I had it all figured out. I'd have it done in a week. But I just enjoy writing. I love writing. I take creative writing classes twice a year to try to keep my brains on that side of my brain working well. And so I enjoy it. And that's how I got into writing books.
What year was that first book coming out?
Oh, gosh, I don't even know when my first book was done.
Are we talking like 1900s or 2000s?
No, it was probably, let me think. It had to be, so around 2000 is when the first one came out. And I sent it up to Dan Holohan and I said, what do you think? And he said, oh my gosh, this is really good. You need to keep going. And he encouraged me and got me in with BMP, and I started writing for plumbing and mechanical engineered systems. And so I did that for 10 years. And now it's kind of ebbed away because everybody's getting away from boilers. So there wasn't a real calling for commercial boiler articles, but I still do it. I've written for RSES, done training for steam fitters or United Association. I'm going to put together some classes, and I hope it's not a competition to you, but I was going to put together some boiler classes that on the commercial side of it, more toward the maintenance person, like what, and the custodian when they walk into a boiler room, like what's a normal noise? What's not normal? And what do you want to look for where it's not dangerous? We got called as a consultant in a school in Ohio. And as I walked in there, the facilities director said, you have to be really careful because we pulled a guy out of here that was overcome by carbon monoxide yesterday, and he was taken to the hospital. I'm like, oh my goodness. And so I got my carbon monoxide tester and it was fine, but we went in there and found out what the problem was. And, I love doing that, Eric. That's why, like the boiler room detective, I love going into a place. And that's one of the things you probably saw as a boiler technician. You go in there after 2 or 3 people have given it their best shot and you're able to get it going. It's a great feeling. And that's why I love the boilers.
My favorite service calls were the ones where you show up to a new customer. My dispatcher called me, hey, like, can you go over to this place? They called. They said they had 3 other contractors come out. They can't fix it. Or they got quotes for, a brand new boiler or whatever. Or they recommended our company because, they're like, well, we need serious boiler people in here. And you go in there and, the customer has 3 contractors come out. They think that the problem is this, big elaborate going to the moon problem. And a lot of the times it comes down to the fundamentals of steam systems and hydronic systems. And you can walk in there and, some of the time in 30 minutes have the boiler up and going. And, I had a full truck of boiler stock of, parts, which most HVAC companies don't. And that's a benefit to calling a boiler service contractor. Like if they don't have it on the truck, they probably have it in their warehouse. But
right.
Yeah, there's so many parts that are not going to be in an HVAC warehouse, especially on larger boilers. But you go in there and you're the expert and you fix that boiler, and that customer, I mean, it's basically like you save the day. And whether it's there's school systems out there, people think, oh, it's just a school or whatever. Like, if the school doesn't have heat, that school system is sending out emails to 500 families and saying, hey, we don't have any school because we don't have any heat. And now that has a huge ripple effect of, well, the parents have to find daycare, or they have to find something for their kids to do, or like, and it causes chaos. And all because, you couldn't get a contractor in there to get the heat on in an appropriate amount of time. So like, even something as trivial as a school, like, every service call matters when you are working on a boiler. And just because it's just not a giant manufacturing facility doesn't mean that the boiler isn't valuable and the work that you're doing isn't valuable. And yeah, I mean, there's few better feelings of fulfillment than being presented with a problem, especially a problem that other people can't fix, and then you fix it, and
That's great.
and then make the customer happy. And going over to the brewery side, I want to hear about, you have a book on brewing. That's probably the only book I haven't bought of yours. But I guess what about breweries makes it special to write about specifically?
Well, how I got involved with it was breweries, the microbreweries started really coming in 10 years ago, 12 years ago. It seemed like every other week there was a new one opening up. And I would talk with a good friend of mine is Jack Coe, that owns Wright Boiler. And he and I would be talking, and he'd tell me, oh, these people are driving me crazy. And my son went to work for him doing sales. And he would call me and say, Dad, these people are trying to run a boiler at 15 PSI, and the pop safeties are going bad. They're saying the pop safeties are bad. They're saying the operating controls are bad. And so I went to this seminar locally here, and it was put on by this guy that's a brewery expert. And he's in there telling the people, well, you need to run your boiler at 15 PSI. And I would never interrupt someone like when you're doing a seminar like that. I just don't believe in doing that. So after the seminar, I pulled him aside and I said, you can't run these boilers at 15 PSI. He said, oh, I do it all the time. And I said, well, let me rephrase it. You can, but you shouldn't. And so I wrote this book because, these people are trying to run it at 15 PSI, and, they pop, the relief valve pops and they lose everything, and then they're upset. They're calling a boiler manufacturer. There's something wrong. So what I did was I changed the industry, and I just, by recommending, hey, look, run it at 11 PSI, 11 to 12. And, it was like the Wild West out there, Eric. Those people are crazy. I got a call from a guy in Baltimore who told me that he had a Wamaclane low-pressure steam boiler, and he's trying to get more heat out of it. And I said, well, what have you done so far? He said, oh, I'm running it at 35 PSI. I'm like, what? And I said, you can only run that at 15. He said, oh, I know. He said, I can run it at 35. And I said, well, where did you get a relief valve for it? He said, well, I got a 45 PSI relief valve online. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And he's going through, so I need to get more heat out of it. I said, man, you're going to blow up. I said, this is a catastrophe. I said, what does your boiler inspector say when he or she comes in to see it? He said, well, I don't tell them I have it. He said, what the government doesn't know won't hurt them. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you're doing this. And so, he said, well, I need you to come down? And I was like, absolutely not. I said, I'm not coming anywhere near yours. I said, your boiler is supposed to run tops at 15 PSI. And he said, that's what the other guys said. And he hung up on me. But I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, this guy's in the inner harbor and he's going to have a boiler explosion and maybe kill people, because he didn't want to listen to what was supposed to be done. So that's kind of how I got into boilers for breweries. And then as I have 2 books on it. And then, what I also started to get, what I started to talk to different groups about the steam boilers for breweries. And, they were asking, well, we need to know how to do maintenance. So I did a second book on there, and the master brewers put some on their website. And I saw a lot of books through them because these people just didn't understand. I had one brewery, and the guy said, I said, well, do you have water treatment? He said, no, no, no. I said, why? He said, well, I drain the boiler after every brew. I'm like, you do? Why? Why would you do that? And he said, well, I don't want to worry about new, about water treatment chemicals. And I said, but you're bringing all this new water in with oxygen hardness. And he said, it's been working great so far. Well, the brewery ended up going out of business, but, it's just crazy. These people I don't know where they hear how to do this type of stuff. And I thought, well, at least with my books, it will hopefully help make it safer in their brewery.
Yeah, that's a common issue with breweries. I've done a lot of maintenance for breweries, startups, and I don't know whatever temperature 11, 12 psi is I guess what they need. That's pretty common in a brewery.
Right.
And they buy low pressure steam boilers because they're cheaper, obviously, than a high pressure steam boiler. And, they think when they buy the boiler that a 15 psi boiler can get them 15 psi, but nobody ever explains it. And I assume you do in your book that the safety valves are set at 15. Then you have a high limit that's, it's supposed to be 10% away. So, 14 at the max. And then you have an operator at 13, maybe 12, and all those safety controls stack up. And now even running at like 11, that boiler, shuts down on a, cause the load turned off real quickly. You have a couple valves and it just overshoots, and then it's a smaller steam system. So then the steam pressure just drops super quick, and then the boiler comes on and it tries to catch up and it overshoots. And yeah, it's this cycle. And I remember one of the last breweries that I did a startup at, they bought a high pressure steam boiler, and they were like questioning me about it. And they're like, well, your salesperson said to buy a high pressure steam boiler and all this stuff because we wanted to run 13 PSI. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. We made the right call because, I explained it out to him. I think he bought like a 30 PSI boiler. I'm like, because if you're going to run 13 PSI, here, and I showed him, here are all the safeties, and the safeties on top of the boiler, and all these have to actuate before 15 psi if you were to have a 15 psi boiler. And if you want 13 psi of steam, this is never going to happen. You're always going to have issues, and just paying a little bit more up front for a proper boiler, because you can't, you buy the wrong boiler, and a lot of breweries will buy a boiler that's used for, right, that's 15 psi, and, you can't just change it to 30. I'm sure there is a process, but it's cheaper to buy a new boiler instead of changing. And, there's all this sunk cost, but just pay a little bit more, get a higher pressure boiler if you need that extra. And that's
what happens here is if you, in the city of Pittsburgh, if you use a high pressure steam boiler, you have to have a full-time boiler attendant tending it, and your insurance is a lot higher, so they try to get away with it. But like even like I got in an argument, not an argument, but disagreement with the guy that was recommending 15 psi. Um, and I showed him, I sent him the information from Combraco that says that they suggest a 4 psi um, buffer. So they said that don't run it any more than 11 psi. And but he showed me drawings. Like all these equipment manufacturers for breweries all have 15 psi's of design pressure. So I worked with the International Code Council. I consulted with them on, they had a new code coming out about steam boilers for breweries. So I don't know when that's coming out, but I worked with them extensively on that, and I hopefully got my ideas in there. But you know, I joke around in my seminars, like I don't have a life. I like reading about boilers, and I joke around in my seminars. I'll show them this picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger in a boiler room, and he's fighting this chainmail dude in there, and it like drives me nuts when I see a boiler room in a movie because they have everything wrong, and you know, and I always say I'm a boilerholic because you know, in this movie, they have this big fight scene, and Arnold pulls his pipe off the side of a boiler, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, like who does the boiler maintenance? Is there any water treatment in here? And you know, it's just funny, but you know, I always joke around. I'd like to be paid a lot of money just to tell people how a boiler room really works and in movies and help them, you know, but nobody's called yet, Eric.
That's I've kind of highlighted on LinkedIn, but whenever I watch a movie, I'll be, you know, sitting there, and it seems to always be an action movie, and the directors get a, you know, they're like, hey, we need an industrial scene, and it always happens to be an old power plant or
Yeah,
like a boiler room, and it's like, you know, how more industrial do you get than an old power plant?
right.
And you know, then I'll be like, whoa, 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 that's a boiler, that's a boiler. I'm like, whoa, and then, you know, I'll pause it, and then I actually started, because there's a lot of like backstory with like movies, and you know, because movies are like an income generator for local cities, and they're, you know, it's, so all the like where they shoot and everything is public if you look it up online. So I'll like look it up, and like the last one I did was a power plant in New Orleans, and
Wow.
like it's been abandoned, but it was used for some movie with Tom Cruise, and yeah, it's cool to see it, and like, you know, then you look at, you know, there's other scenes, and you're like, well, that's a boiler room, that's a boiler room, and you know, you try to figure out what the boilers are, and yeah, I mean, it's,
So you're a boilerholic too.
oh, that's my neighbor. I just had a new neighbor move in next to me, and he's like, oh, what are you doing? You know, because I saw him, you know, on a Saturday. I'm like, oh, I'm working, you know, working on this boiler thing. He's like, oh, well, you can't work your life away. And I'm like, you know, I enjoy what I do. Like, well,
Yeah,
one, I work for
yeah,
myself, you know, but two, like I enjoy boilers, and probably one of my biggest pet peeves is when people say, ah, you work too much. You can't, you know, always work like that. And I'm like this is like, I'm not sitting here reading about boilers and looking at boilers in movies and being like, oh man, I wish I was at the beach. Like, this is interesting. I always kind of compare it to like, you know, nobody blinks when somebody sits down on a Saturday and watches football for 10 hours
right,
and then
right.
can list off every single roster of every NFL and college team for the last 40 years. Nobody blinks. Like, that's normal. But when you nerd out over boilers, they go, oh, you're too obsessed and all this
Yeah,
stuff. And it's like, well, you know, if it's interesting to you, you know, why not be obsessed? Why always have foot in, foot out, and, you know, constantly regulate yourself based on what other people think of you? And yeah, I mean, I would, I always tell people, like, I would do service calls for free if like it didn't cost me time and money.
right,
Like,
right.
but as you said, like to walk into a boiler room and like to just even like, you know, they call it consulting, but even to just talk with the owner and say like, hey, this is what you have, and even I'll get people sending me old boilers that are like abandoned in place, and you probably have a ton of those in Pittsburgh,
Yeah.
where it's hundreds of thousands of dollars to tear it out. So they just abandon it in place, and I'm like, that is so cool. And like I used to go to plants with boilers that they used to be like coal, so you can see like the coal elevators and all the
Right.
coal chutes and, all the riveted coal
Right.
hoppers and, and I'm like, this is so cool. And people are just like, oh, well, I'm like,
I know. I
I'm
know.
like, this boiler room was built in 1910. Like, think about all the history that has happened since 1910, the Great
I
Depression,
agree.
both world wars. Like, internet wasn't even, a thing. The automobile was barely a thing. The airplane was barely a thing. And we're working in a boiler room that is over a century old. And we're just like, whatever. Like, cool. Like, I'm like, yeah. And that's the cool thing about boilers that I like is like, as you said, they last, and it's not uncommon, especially in the Northeast, to work on a boiler that's 50 years old, 60 years old, 70 years old. And, in air conditioners, shoot, a rooftop unit, if you get to 15 years on a rooftop unit, it's rip it off and replace. But a rooftop unit is, nowadays, well, I guess we could even say this about boilers, but nowadays, I mean, it's just sheet metal just slammed together. But,
Right.
you go into an old boiler room, and maybe, I don't know if you have a cool boiler room that you've seen or a favorite picture, but I mean, I've posted pictures on LinkedIn of, they used to put like they used to cast the front doors of the boiler and put like the engineer's name and the customer's name and like the date and like all this and cast it into the front doors of the boiler. And it's like, how much, like, obviously nobody really knows, I guess, why they did that, but like that takes so much care and pride to cast your name into a boiler that is now still around 80 to 100 years later. And nowadays, it's just stamp everything, engrave it, or even just print it on a
Right.
little sticker that gets wiped off the first time you clean it. And you're like, there's no permanence to this. And yes, it costs you an extra $5 to engrave a tag, but just, I don't know. Do you have a favorite boiler, or I guess what's the oldest boiler you've seen?
I don't remember what the age of it was, but what fascinated me, Eric, was I was in this old boiler room and I see 12-inch threaded pipe. Now, I used to be a steam fitter, and the biggest pipe that I ever did by hand was 6-inch. And man, I was in good shape back then, but holy cow, that thing tore me apart. And I look at this and I think they didn't have any of the stuff we had. They didn't have power threaders. They didn't have, how would they do that? Like it just blew me away. And I wonder, like, what was that service technician's life like? And did his knuckles drag on the ground as he walked? Because he had to look like Popeye with huge arms. And did you ever wonder about, like, how did they thread that? How did they lift this piece in the air? When they didn't have, the power tools and power equipment we have now, and was it 10 guys lifting up a 10-inch spool of pipe or something? It's just, I'd love to go back just to see it. I wouldn't want to do it, but I'd love to go back just to see how they threaded it. And
Yeah, I brought up that question on LinkedIn a while ago. I think I showed a 8-inch threaded
Mhm.
gate valve with pipe, and like I don't think I got a good answer. I guess it was basically threaders how we have today, but they were obviously all manually operated. But I think Dan Holohan, he's as you know, but from the New York area, so that's basically steam ground zero. And I think in one of his books he was saying there was a riser in a building that he found that was like 20-inch threaded or
my goodness.
something. And he was like, and I think it was like 20-inch threaded, and then at the top of the riser it reduced into like a giant air vent or something
Right.
that
Right.
I would have to go back. It's been a minute since I cracked open his books. I have all his other books. It's actually, you brought up BMP Media. They uh, one of the magazines that they represent, and I don't know if you went, but they were trying to start this conference thing. Probably 2018, probably 2018. And it only made it 1 year. They did a horrible job advertising it, and it was
Well, I spoke there about brewery boilers.
okay. But I literally told them, they're like, "Oh, why'd you come?" I'm like, "Because Dan Holohan was speaking, and I wanted to see his class." And like, this is 2018, 2019 is the tail end of his career, and I'm like, this was like the one opportunity that I had to come see him speak, and I'm like, this is literally the only reason I came. I don't care about the rest of the agenda. All I wanted was literally to come and see him because I had
Oh,
read.
that was before I did it. Yeah. He's a gifted speaker. I mean, he's a good friend of mine, and man, he's just the way he can control a room and talk, and I just have so much respect for him, and he's just so smart, and he's seen so many things, and he's not afraid to, like, he gives a story in one of his seminars about how he was working for the Bell and Gossett rep, and they closed the valve on a big big pump by mistake and forgot to open it. And he and the contractor were sitting there in the other room, and all of a sudden, there, boom, and it blew the pump apart. And that would not be something I would want to share with my viewers or my readers and stuff. But um, I wanted to ask you or tell you, like, what my scariest boiler room was I got a call from a friend of mine that was with Hope Gas down in West Virginia. And he said, he'd been to several of my seminars and things. And he said, I need your help. We were going to see a boiler room at this hospital where they couldn't afford to pay the gas bill. And so we drove down to West Virginia, and I met him down there. And we walked into the boiler room, and it was an old boiler, and had the doors you can open up. I can't remember what the name of them, the HRTs or something. Reopen up, you could see inside the base of the boiler. And we were talking with the chief engineer, the director of maintenance, the gas company technician, and myself were in there, and they were talking about how their gas bills were just outrageous. And I walked into this place, and I should have known, like, whenever I see the 4x4 electrical covers off the boxes, like, my spidey sense starts to tingle. And we're in there talking, and the chief engineer said, I have to start the boiler. I'm thinking, what do you mean you have to start the boiler? This is 1999. So I'm talking, and out of the corner of my eyes, watch this guy walk over to the boiler. He opens up those two doors into the combustion chamber, opens up a 3-inch gas line. He grabs his broom that was next to the boiler, lights it, sticks it down into the combustion chamber, and all of a sudden this flame shot out about 6 feet out of the man doors. And this guy's laughing. He puts it out, and I'm like, I said, don't ever do that when I'm in this room with you. And I said, what are you doing? He said, oh, flame safeguards, they're really expensive. We just wired it together so that whenever I need heat, I just open up this gas valve. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And he thought nothing of that, Eric, nothing. And I told the gas company guy, I said, we got to get the hell out of here. This is going to blow up. And but the hospital ended up closing up less than a year later, but just crazy to me.
Are you a member of the popping a boiler club? Have you ever popped a
No,
popped a boiler, delayed ignition at all.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I unfortunately became a member. I was told you're not a real boiler guy until you become a member of Pop the Boiler Club, but I had a boiler burner. I had a burner from an unknown manufacturer. The maintenance person had reversed the fuel oil lines on it, and I was in there for a PM just to set combustion, and I asked him, I was like, all right, like, how often do you check fuel oil? And they're like, oh, well, we fire it once a month on every single boiler. So I go through, do all the gas, and I get back to this boiler to do the oil, start it, put it in oil, and it goes off on pilot flame safeguard or pilot failure. I'm like, oh, that's weird, whatever. So, sometimes there's air in the line and whatnot, when you're running. So I just reset it. I reset the boiler once, and it goes through the whole purge and everything. And it went to main. It made it through pilot this time. It went to main, and it was like 1 second, 2 second. And I'm like, there's no flame. And I just go to touch the
Uh,
off button. Boom. And so the maintenance person had reversed the supply and return lines of the fuel oil going into the nozzle.
oh my gosh.
And I guess it was dumping fuel oil during the whole pre-purge cycle, which the burner manufacturer said was impossible. I have different experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so it ignited because it was a hot boiler, and the fumes lit off the hot boiler or the pilot or whatever, and it ripped the whole center of the burner out. The whole burner came out, the fire tube, the front and back of it bowed out. The whole stack split apart. The
Oh, you're lucky.
site police came running in like a bomb went off, and luckily no injuries. I just had a very, very minor flash burn. But I was wearing FR clothes and everything, but I got super lucky with it. But it's one of those things of could I have checked everything? Yes. But, I would have never noticed that somebody had reversed the lines. That's not something I'm going to check. And it's also not something I'm going to check when the maintenance person says, hey, yeah, we fired every month on fuel oil. I'm like, why would there ever be an issue?
Right.
And
Right.
after that, it's zero trust on anything.
Yep.
As building owners, maintenance people will lie to you to maybe save their job or whatever. As a service person or a consultant, you come in, and a lot of people think you're there to get them fired and it's well, if you just tell me what you did, or tell me how this scenario started, we're just about finding a resolution. I'm not here to just throw you under the bus and say, it's this guy's fault. I'm on your team, but let's find a solution together, and I will find out the problem eventually. But if you just tell me what you did, we can get there faster. And yeah, it's building that trust. And yeah, I don't know if you've ever had somebody lie to you and you're then you find out.
We had a customer flip burners from an old boiler to the new boiler and saying, oh, your new boiler's not working. And I looked at the date code and the condition of it, and I'm like, this isn't my new burner. And luckily, when I did the startups, I had taken pictures of the burners, model and serial number, and on all of them. And he threw his coworker, and he said, oh, it must have been Joe did that, and stuff. But
yeah, that's something that's hard to teach people is whatever the customer says, you note it, but it's never the truth or gospel immediately.
no.
And you are the boiler expert, and they called you for a reason. And if they say, hey, I think it's this, or this is the problem, we just need this part changed, you need to verify it, because
Yeah.
there's a reason why you're there. You're the expert, and you have the knowledge. And I always preach online about like very, very simple, very low level boiler stuff. And I'll get people saying like, everybody knows this and whatnot. Going back to the safety valve, and how you can't run a 15 PSI boiler at 15 and
Right.
all this stuff. Like that's not common knowledge. Common knowledge is if you were to go to an 18-year-old high schooler and say, hey, what is this? And they could tell you that's common knowledge. But boilers are not common knowledge. So
Well,
everything has to be taught. And I think a lot of the times, and you're way more experienced than I am, but a lot of times the very experienced people, even only 10 to 15 years into the industry, they forget how little they knew when they started and they write off the difficulties of somebody starting. And I always relate it back to like, a third grader or whatnot. Like no adult tells a third grader, well, it's just addition. You should just understand what 2 + 2 is. Like, why are we teaching this? It's the same thing with boilers. Just because somebody's older and 20 years old, 25 years old doesn't make the information like it doesn't make like, oh, you should just know it, just absorb it. Like
right.
everything has to be taught. And even in your seminars, like your seminars are probably very low level, very general, but the people hearing the information, they're hearing that information for the first time. And if you were to just get into details, they would be lost in the first 5 minutes. And then that's not what they need to hear. And I think as an industry, we don't do a good job at educating people that one that are part of the industry, but two, the people that are customers and owners and whatnot, because we just assume that they know. And
Well, I think ABMA is starting to make inroads doing that now. The American Boiler Manufacturers Association, they're trying to bring that more on board, and I try to help them in any way I can because like I said, I have a passion for boilers. So they're always willing to listen, to try to come up with what do they need to know. And I remember the one that was 2 years ago, I learned something new, that there's a guy talking about hydrogen boilers. And I thought, oh, that'd be great. And one of the things that I found out was that you can't use threaded pipe with a hydrogen boiler because the hydrogen molecules are too small and they'll sneak out of the threaded fittings. So you either have to go to flanged or welded, which is kind of crazy. I never knew that. Never would have even realized that.
yeah,
So,
the hydrogen's an interesting conversation, and I don't know enough to speak on it, but the blended hydrogen skids are, I guess, if the customer is able to get hydrogen at the right price, it makes sense. But from what I'm seeing, there's still no great replacement to the good old natural gas. Do you have in Pittsburgh is, it's an older city, older territory. Do you have a like is the scene for electric boilers in the Pittsburgh area? Is there a huge push? Have you had people reach out?
there was, and until they found out how much the electric conversion would be, and the utility companies were having a hard time keeping up with it. What we're seeing is, like I said, on space heating, that's my side of the industry, and we're seeing a lot of people going to the VRF systems. But I have clients that are really concerned because of the new flammable refrigerants, R454, R32 are what they call slightly flammable. But what amazed me is you look at the MSDS sheet, it says extremely flammable. So I don't know who you believe there, but, and then they're supposed to go to the R290, which is propane or butane, I think is what's coming up with. And, I'm thinking, they thought boilers were dangerous, and um, I would think something like that would be a lot more dangerous than a boiler with redundant safety controls on it.
Yeah, I've watched the refrigerant change. I learned about refrigeration in college, and I have forgotten 80% of it, but I know enough to work on my own refrigeration system and to like be able to read about it and understand. And yeah, the A2L and flammable refrigerant, and most of the HVAC educators are basically waving a flag of like, hey, like we can barely teach people to work on 410A systems that have been around for the last 20 years or whatever, very simple systems. And now we're constantly changing the refrigerant. We're changing it to a mildly flammable refrigerant, and like it's not like natural gas. It's not going to just explode. But um, a lot of those systems have so little refrigerant that that's how they can do it. But there's such a level of training. It's not the HVAC systems of the 90s or previous or even 2000. Like everything has a board in it. Everything is, little lights, little clickers, and it takes somebody with deep electrical knowledge and understanding of the refrigeration cycle and electrical troubleshooting and equipment knowledge that even on the residential side, if you're like, I'm going to just learn all the equipment and be an expert on everything,
Good luck.
equipment is moving so fast with how manufacturers dream up new technology or even change the technology for the new regulations. And so, and this problem is also with boilers is you have to learn all the new stuff and then you have to learn all the old stuff. And somebody coming into the industry, they may learn on new stuff, but then they go and work on a air conditioner from 1980, which they're rare, but there's still air conditioners from 1980 around, and they're like, oh, like what is this, like, oh, I don't have the right refrigerant for this, or it's R22. And there's such a width of knowledge. And in the boiler industry, I guess you started a while ago when flame safeguards probably still had like cams
Sure.
in them,
Right.
and now everything's solid state. I guess what do you see for on the training side? What would your approach for training be of a new person, whether they're a technician or a salesperson? How do we teach them boilers without overloading them with a dump truck of information?
As far as boilers, there's not a whole lot out there. I mean, people like you, um, and I guess there's some other places out there, but I think you're going to see a need. And what I'm afraid of is rather than fixing them or finding someone and training their people on how to work on the boilers, you're going to see them just starting to rip them out and put in ducted systems or ductless systems. And, whereas, like you said, the life expectancy of a heat pump or a rooftop is 15 years, and I think we've done a disservice to our industry because like a lot of the condensing boilers, number one is it seems like the installers or the manufacturers are hesitant to tell people, hey, these take a lot more maintenance than a cast iron sectional boiler with a standing pilot. You need to disassemble them every year and clean out the secondary heat exchanger and stuff. And they kind of don't really tell the customer that. And so we end up having these premature failures on condensing boilers. And even the applications, like, they don't, if you buy a condensing furnace for your house, that will condense all the time it's running, right? But you buy a condensing boiler for your building, and it may or may not condense, depending on what the return water temperature is. And a lot of them don't understand that, and it gives us a bad look in the industry, a black eye, Oh, they're junk. We didn't get, and quite frankly, I got caught up in that too. And that's where I got burned was when the condensing boilers started to come into the marketplace. They would show you this brochure and it says 95% efficient boiler. And I'll be like, oh, so our manufacturer that we dealt with, had, bought a European company and had them put their name of their boilers on there. And so I'd have clients ask, well, how much, am I going to save? I said, oh, your old boiler's 80%. These ones are 95%, and you're going to save X amount of dollars. And they didn't. And one was a realization, I guess it's what Dan Holohan calls you learn by being out in the field. And this thing had, it was heating, it was in a college, it was heating, space heating domestic hot water in the swimming pool. And they were roughly getting, it was calling for about 160-degree water all the time. Well, it never condensed. And the owner had me look over his fuel bills and said, hey, you lied to me. We were supposed to save 25% and we didn't. And so I started to look at it, and then like that 95% that's on the boiler brochure, that's with 70-degree water coming back. Well, I'm not going to be able to do much in this system that was designed for 180 with 70-degree water. And it embarrassed me, and I got to learn that this is what you need to do. You can't go out there and just throw this number at the people.
Yeah, it's the front of the marketing brochure tells the best case scenario of what is possible. And I've seen it where people are doing a retrofit, and especially in the Northeast, you got an old school, old church or something that is meant to run at 180 degrees, and a simple outdoor reset between 150 and 180 would save them money. But you sell them a condensing boiler system and rip out cast iron, and that's super simple and everything, and all of a sudden now you're like, well, it's going to be $2,000 a boiler in maintenance,
Right.
and you have to do it every year, and you got mesh burners. If it rips it, that's $2,000 depending on the size of the boiler. And you have air filters, and you have condensate neutralizer, and if they don't keep up with that, the condensate rots out their drains, and their drains are all cast iron, so they're rotting out. And it becomes a maintenance nightmare where the savings are not, if you don't refit the whole building to run at condensing temperatures,
Right.
the savings are not there. And that's where, I always try to view the people and companies from a positive perspective of, hey, we're going to present options to the customer and say, hey, you could do this, but this is actually what makes sense. But, the makes sense part doesn't make us the most money and sells a cheaper boiler, and I don't think that always happens all the time. And it's always just moving product, getting the picture and saying, hey, we just did a retrofit on a super high, and now they have super high efficient, reliable boilers. And I always, maybe that's true, but I always want to see, and I'm curious just for like, what these companies are selling. And I see it all the time on LinkedIn, but like, what are the savings? Are the savings really there? And yes, there are savings, but like, did we look at the last 2 years? And are we going to look at the next 2 years? And do we have a super efficient, reliable boiler over the entire cost? And the entire cost includes service. And if you have a building that had cast iron boilers, and you show up once a year to clean the thermocouple and make sure the boiler light's off in October, and you're out within 4 hours. That is wildly different than doing full service on 3 condensing boilers with gasket kits and neutralizer and changing out the neutralizer, and oh, now we have this PLC and this touchscreen. Oh, the touchscreen went bad. That's $1,500, $2,000, and those little parts here and there can eat away all your efficiency gains if you do have efficiency. So looking at the true life cycle cost of the whole boiler, it's more than just the fuel bill. The fuel bill is the highest percentage, but if you're not saving on the fuel bill, all the other maintenance costs just piles on the costs, and now building owners aren't prepared for that. And now they're like, well, why? Like, we paid for this boiler that is basically a high performance race car when all we needed was just Honda Accord. And yeah, and everything's shrouded in secrecy and all this stuff. And like, I want to see the payback cycles and calculations and actual, like, oh, like this is projected payback. Cause I've heard, companies that promise payback, and then the building owner will put in contingencies. And I've seen it that these companies end up paying out huge checks because this promised payback for this amazing project that they did, the payback doesn't even come close to what they promised. And then, there's this clawback contingency and all this stuff. But, and that, as that just goes back to educating the customer and saying, hey, here are your options. And, this is what we think you should do, and a good, better, best. And, I always find it funny that the best option always seems to be the equipment that the person reps. And it's like, well, like, maybe that isn't the best option. Maybe they need something else. And, I understand, making sales, but at the end of the day, like, that boiler is going to last 20 years. And if you're just making a sale to make a sale and it's not actually a true match, you got to match the boiler to the application. As you're probably aware, the life of the boiler starts on the boiler install. And if the boiler install is messed up, the entire life of the boiler is screwed up. And like on low pressure steam systems, you've probably seen, and Dan talks for miles in his books about people replacing low pressure steam systems or just the boiler, and they screw it all up, and they're maxing out the pressure to 10 psi, and his famous thing is to turn down the pressure. And I guess, like, so you're doing consulting. So for your Boiler Room Detective YouTube channel, I guess, does that all stem from you making visits to customer sites and problems?
Sometimes it's people will send me questions about their boiler room, and I may say, hey, this is a great one. Or in my seminars, sometimes I know you're not a big advocate for AI, but like what I did was I had ChatGPT look at all my videos, and I say, hey, what are some subjects I'm not covering? And it gave me some ideas. And like sometimes I'll use that to come up with some ideas. I'll go through my seminars and I'll think, oh, or what stuff you read on heatinghelp.com or on LinkedIn that you see, or some of the Facebook posts that I see that people are interested in. Like my latest book, I just did one on electric, troubleshooting how to read a wiring diagram. And where that came from was I was on heatinghelp.com and I asked the people, I said, what do you think is a better class? Would you like hydronics? Would you like low pressure steam? A combination of those? And without a doubt, the first 6 or 8 people that answered it said wiring diagrams. These new technicians don't know how to read a wiring diagram. So I thought, well, I'll try to put something together. And I see you're putting a class together on it. And You got to make it easy. And I was just did a class earlier in the week, and what I realized was that a lot of these technicians don't want to admit that they don't know how to read a wiring diagram. And, you know, you don't want to embarrass them in front of the other people there. So what I did was on mine, I just came up with some, what do you normally check on it? And I kind of blew it off like, oh, you probably all know this, but I saw people taking notes in the back too, you know, but I don't know what it is. I mean, they'll say they don't know about steam or they don't know about hydronic, but when it comes to electric, they're afraid of admitting they don't know. I don't know what that take is. And right now, my electric book's my number one bestseller. I paste in all my other books.
What is that book called?
Uh, Lessons Learned Understanding Boiler Wiring Diagrams. It just came out about 6 months ago, 8 months ago. It's on Amazon.
Oh, it's not even on your website.
No, I'm trying to redo my website. Sorry.
All right. Well, I don't have that book. I'll have to get that book. I didn't even know it came out.
You
But
send me your address and I'll send you one. So
thank you. I want it signed.
yeah, okay.
But yes, putting on a seminar October 13th or workshop October 13th to 16th, and you know it's a live online workshop, and I've been reaching out to companies. I have people signed up already. We have 20 spots for it, and
Good for you.
and it's explaining to these companies like your service technicians, while they may be able to fix the problem, they may not understand the problem. And on the service side, you're almost not rewarded for fixing the problem fast. Like if an expert comes in and finds the problem in 30 minutes and fixes it, then you only get paid or bill out for an hour. And I know some companies have minimum charges, but let's say you only bill out for an hour. Well, if you have a person that doesn't really know what they're doing and they come in and poke around and hunt, and then, you know, may replace 2 parts and eventually fix the problem in 6 hours. Well, now you just build out for 6 hours and the 2 parts that weren't really bad but got changed.
Right.
And now the bill's bigger, and you know, you make more money, but it's like, well, you know, you didn't, you know, there's a whole ethical thing there. But on the service side, with boilers, you almost can't lie. Like at a certain point in time, the boiler system either works or it doesn't. And this is electrical, you know, this is system design and everything. And you can't just blame it on, oh, well, you know, it's old, you just need a new one and stuff. Like you can get away with that in residential. With boilers, if the boiler's been running 20 years and the system is 20 years old and you don't know what you're doing, you come in, it's very apparent very quickly that you don't know what you're doing. And that's why it's so important to hire a specialized boiler contractor. A lot of HVAC companies these days, I don't know if you see it in Pittsburgh, but they'll just sell full maintenance contracts.
Yep.
Hey, we'll just work on all the equipment in your building. You only have to call one person. It's one price per month. You know, everything's covered. And you find out quickly, or the building owner finds out quickly, that while it may sound super easy and efficient for them at a certain point in time, their equipment will lack maintenance, and the boilers are one of the first to probably go because, and you probably see it, is water treatment is the number one killer. And if you don't understand water treatment, your boiler is going to die. And on low pressure steam systems, I mean, do you see a ton of leaks? Or like, I guess for consulting, I don't know what kind of conditioned boiler rooms you walk into and you're just like, this is just water treatment issues.
90% of the problems I see are water treatment. And I don't know. I just was talking about this in my seminar the other day about how I don't know if there's something different in the water now, but we're seeing a lot more leaks, and we're also seeing a lot tighter specifications with manufacturers on what they want. Like, you and I have been around long enough that one of the staples in the steam boiler room is a water softener. Well, I just had one client, I was looking over their information in their brochure or in their IOM manual, and it said, if you put softened water in our boiler, it's going to void the warranty. I'm like, wow, that's hard for me to believe. But everybody has different specifications now, different pH levels, different TDS levels and things. So you really have to stay on top of it. And, they're starting to void warranties, manufacturers, because they're saying, well, this wasn't done or you didn't flush the boiler. That's another thing. I just did a video on that last week where there's certain manufacturers that if you didn't flush the boiler and they find out about it, they void your warranty, and so
Flush the boiler or flush the system?
flush the system. I mean, sorry.
Yeah. Can you talk on that? If you were to replace a boiler in an existing building.
What this is mostly on the condensing boilers and the new boilers. The passages through the water going through the hydronic boilers are a lot more narrow. The heat exchangers are a lot thinner, and so we're seeing there's one manufacturer. I'm not going to give a name, but it voids a warranty if you don't flush the piping system. And what you're finding out is that I was even talking with a manufacturer of circulators, and they said their number one warranty problem is junk that gets inside the pump. And we're seeing a lot of the magnetic water treatment, which I'm a little leery of, but to try to get a hold of the magnetite in the piping. But you really need to go in there, and on a commercial building, I don't even know how you'd flush a system on a commercial, like a school or something like that. That must be a 4-day project to try to flush all the piping on there, all the different zones that you have and stuff like that. But it's critical now.
Yeah, on a hydronic system, I don't think I've ever flushed a hydronic, but essentially I would guess depends on how you pipe the new boilers, but you would either I've seen it, I've pictures and I've heard it. You run the pumps through a temporary filtration system. I've seen that, and they'll just pipe in some flexible hoses, and that could be magnets. I'm interested to hear about the magnet, but also on the steam side, and Dan Holohan talks about this, and you probably talk about this in your books, on a new system startup to dump the condensate for a week or so,
Right.
because of all that's the condensate coming back is bringing back all the impurities, and you don't want to push that back into your system until you verify that the condensate coming back is pure and clean and not full of, even a brand new system has, weld particles and dust and all that stuff that gets in the pipes and can cause issues. But on the magnetic filtration side, is there something? I know it's a hot topic that came around, 5 to 7 years ago, a lot of advertising around it. Is there something that that I don't, or?
No, I guess I'm just hesitant because, about 20 years ago, I was in the hospital engineers group here in Pittsburgh, and a good friend of mine was director of facilities for 2 hospitals. And they had come up with this magnetic water treatment for cooling towers. They said, oh, you'll save a fortune. You'll save 1 month payback, blah, blah, blah. And so my friend that was a director of facilities his next door neighbor started selling it and was telling him it's the greatest thing, we've all heard that line, right? So he bought him for 2 cooling towers he had. And a couple months later, the cooling towers were completely ruined. I don't know what happened, but it was completely ruined. And my friend lost his job as a result of it. So I've always been leery, when someone says, oh, we have the greatest thing in the world, that I'm a little leery about it. And I've seen those magnetic filters, and they're awesome, but you still got to clean those out, or that the magnetite that's in there. And then I also want to find out why is the pipe rusting on the inside. That's just putting a Band-Aid on something. I have a contingency that I agree with, that I think that every boiler needs water treatment, no matter whether it's steam or hydronic. And what I do is I recommend a water meter on the makeup water line, because you need to know if you're losing water. And a lot of people don't even do that.
Yeah, that's a good thing to speak on, is the water meter, hydronic and steam. And you, as a customer or even a service company, but a building owner, you got to think of your boiler system as a system. It's not a boiler, it's not piping, it's a whole system. And the water, think of it as energy resources. And if you're constantly putting in energy resources to your system, you have a leak somewhere, because a hydronic system is closed. It should be closed. And if you're constantly putting in water, you have a leak. And then on a steam system, if you're constantly putting in water, you also have a leak, or you're not returning your condensate. And a lot of older systems, I guess, do you find low pressure steam systems with like underground tunnels, underground condensate return,
sure,
that like steam traps haven't been looked at in 30 years and it's just like a wasteland down there?
It is. It's horrible. And I'll give you, for instance, one of my clients is a real estate management firm, and we sold them boilers, and they liked them. We sold them modular boilers. I was a big proponent of them at the time, and I told them that they should really replace all the steam traps in their system. And what we talked them into was those the rebuild kits you can get, where you take the cover off, pull the thermostatic bellows out, and put a new one in. Well, he called to tell me, the facilities director, that they had the lowest cost per square foot of any of their buildings, hydronic including, and he was pretty impressed with how it was able to save a lot of money with it. But yeah, we see what I tell people to do. And unfortunately, these guys trying to get the job, I tell them, if you have a wet return, either replace it, or you really got to clean it up, because that's where you're going to have your leaks, and that's probably where you are. And we got called to a church in Pittsburgh, where they were losing water all the time. And we went down and we used the thermal scanner on there, and we found the leak was under the concrete floor in the cafeteria. So yeah, they're tough to find sometimes.
What about near boiler piping on a low pressure steam system?
I have a theory that 99% of them are wrong. You'll see some guys. I really like the drop header that we're seeing, that you see a lot on Heating Help and some of the other ones, but most of them are just, people just don't understand. And the biggest disservice you're doing to yourself as a boiler service technician is to use your hydronic education to work on steam, because it's completely opposite of steam systems. It's closer aligned to an air conditioner, because you have two changes of state than it is to a hydronic system.
Have you seen any cast iron boilers crack from expansion contraction of an improperly piped header?
Oh, definitely. Oh, I'll give you one that I got burned on. Was we had a college in the next state over that was they were saying they were having problems keeping boilers. So we looked at it, and they had three-way valves, and they had different zones, and so we sold them some boilers and gave them some ideas on what to do about the three-way valves, how to overcome the shock. But what we didn't know was my boilers were leaking after 3 years. I had a vertical fire tube boiler, and we got called down there, and we couldn't figure it out. And they fixed the boilers, they retubed them, and so it happened again 3 years later. And what we had found was that none of their controls worked, Eric. Whenever they needed heat, they would contact the maintenance technician. He would run over there and start the circulator or pump for that zone. Whenever they were satisfied, he would shut the pump off. Well, there were zones where they weren't really calling. It was full of 50 or 60 degree water. That water all of a sudden gets thrown back into their boiler that's 180, and it destroyed it. So anyway, what time did you want to keep going till?
I would talk to you for 5 hours. I don't.
I know. I didn't know if I'm supposed to go to a lunch with a client. I wasn't sure how long we were going to talk.
No,
we can do it again if you want, man. We can talk about stuff. I'll be glad to. I love talking about boilers too.
No, we can wrap it up. That's good. You've dropped a good amount of knowledge. Always love talking to people like you who are students of the industry, even in your wise years. I would say real quick, my last question, is retirement on the horizon? Because I selfishly want to extract everything out of you as far as knowledge, and I don't want you dropping off and moving to some island somewhere. I want to keep hearing from you and learning.
You know what, Eric? I love doing what I'm doing. I get up every day with a smile on my face, and I try to write for 2 hours every morning. And I'm not doing the physical part, but I love the look when you see a younger technician. You see that sparkle in his or her eye as they get it, and that's what I love. I live for that. I'm looking to what I'm going to try to do. My passion is I talked with Brian Orr and his wife about, they have that Grit Foundation where they're trying to help these people. And as a matter of fact, I'm trying to put one together now. I talked with a lot of the unions about putting together a day where, maybe I'll get the plumbers union, Local 95, to come in, and they're going to teach people how plumbing works. We're going to have people come in and talk about, that we can't find technicians, and that's the common thread. Right now, we're down so many, and they're saying within the next 5 years it's going to be an epidemic. So I want to be able to walk in it, and you and I both know this is a great career choice, because if you don't like what your boss is doing, you could say, see ya, I'm out of here. And you could have 5 other companies that are willing to hire you. And that's what I love about it. And I try to instill that into these young people that, hey, you know what? You want to be independent? This is the greatest business for that, because, you can work for anybody you want. You can work for buildings. You can work for contractors. So that's what I'm hoping to do. But I'm not going to be doing the physical work, but I'm still going to be writing and doing my videos and doing my classes. So
that's a great way to end this podcast. Always love that. Go check out fireiceheat.com. Look at the rate,
Boiler Room Detective.
Boiler Room Detective and the
Yeah.
Boiler books. He has multiple books. I would say buy all of them, but don't buy all of them. You'll overload yourself. Buy one, read it, learn, then buy another one, read it, learn. If you buy all of them, it'll be a stack. It'll be daunting, but eventually buy all of them. If you're a family member, if you are 25 and your wife says, "Hey, what do you want for Christmas?" and don't say I don't know or nothing, say I want Ray's boiler books because I want to make myself better and more knowledgeable and more valuable. So, yeah, I deeply appreciate you coming on the Boiler Wild podcast, and
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I
I did have a question for you, though. I think that there's a real need in the marketplace for a book on burners, the linkage list and the linkage. And I am not as well versed on the linkage list, and I think that would be something you'd be perfect for, my friend. You know, that
yeah, I mean, so
you were Mike Shepard. I keep trying to talk you guys into it.
yeah, Mike's great. Trying to get him to come on. But yeah, it's especially since I'm 100% boiler education, or when I say boiler, it's anything related to boiler. That kind of trips people up. But it's the balance between revenue and what the industry needs. And I have to focus, unfortunately, on revenue and what people pay for. And when there are linkageless companies going around doing free trainings that are 1 or 2 days, it is hard to compete with that. But I will also say, not that they're doing it bad, but you're not going to learn linkageless systems in 1 to 2 days in a seminar, and you have to apply more pressure over a longer period of time. And there is value in that. I've thought about putting classes together, and like this is wildly different than what's currently on the market when I say classes, but I'm going to leave it at that to not give away my ideas. But there is value. Burners, and I just talked to a guy in the Chicago area who is up with you in age and experience and wisdom, and I'm like, how do you teach people large water tube boilers and those huge burners? And I'm like, we have enough problems trying to teach people the small stuff, and now you're getting into custom PLCs and all this custom programming, and it takes such a specialized person, and yet the industry doesn't have any other good way other than well, we'll just stick them with the senior guy. Well, the senior guys are retiring,
Right.
and there's a gap. And yeah, I mean, it's if somebody wants to cut the check or put money forward up front, I am always open to ears. But I am trying to target what makes the greatest impact over the longest period of time. And that's why I'm coming out, or that's why I'm putting on that electrical workshop. I'm presenting it with another electrical guy who is a wizard. And I mean, if you are struggling with electrical, if you look at a ladder diagram and don't understand it and don't understand what your electrical meter is doing, that class and workshop is for you. Like, it's going to be awesome, and it's going to be different than anything you've experienced. And I don't see anybody doing this. Like, this is not a webinar. This is not an information presentation. This is deep learning, and you can learn even though we're not in person. And that's my pitch for that. That's the October 13th to 16th. It's online. You don't have to travel. But yeah, I appreciate you coming on. Go eat lunch, and yeah, we'll have to do this again, and
I'd love to.
Maybe we'll get in-person class together. Get the boiler industry heavyweights together, and
Love it.
just do a hour presentation each and just drop the experience and the stories. And yeah, I would love that. That'd be cool. So, all right.
Anytime. Thanks.